Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to start with the word portage, the title of this exhibition. So if you are not familiar, portage is when you carry your boat over the land. This might happen if you're traveling on a river and encounter an obstacle like rapids or a waterfall or some other danger. Or it may be when you are transferring from one body of water to the next, so the system of lakes. So why is this show called Choosing the Portage? And it's leaning into the metaphor. So using that, in some cases, rather absurd act, right? A boat is built to carry you. And so the work and effort and labor of carrying one's boat, to think about cultural inheritance and how the traditions and cultures that we are born into or that are in our heritage and our legacy, how do they manifest within our everyday lives? How does material culture play a role in that passing down of knowledge? What is that strategy, right? When choosing to portage, there's a lot of labor involved, and so you have to really decide, right? Am I going to take this risk, or am I going to carry this 16-foot canoe on my back, right? Or knowing that you might need to portage, you have to think strategically about what you're going to bring with you on your journey. What do you really need? These are a set of questions that are also familiar to the experience of the emigre, right? And so portage is an image that is not necessarily in any of the works themselves, but an ethos that I think speaks to the care, the deliberateness, the strategic way that each of the 5 artists in this exhibition conduct themselves and their work from their own unique cultural perspective, but beyond just expressing or speaking to their identity, right? And so portage is also movement, it's a transition. So the idea in this exhibition is to also think about that cultural inheritance as something that is fluid, that is active, that we choose what we carry, and how we carry it and how we wield it. Okay, so there's so much to talk about in this show. But I first want to also share, before I let these amazing artists introduce themselves, that this exhibition is really near and dear to my heart, and I am just so honored to have had the opportunity to work on it and produce it here, and to open it today and share it with all of you. It's been kind of two and a half years rattling around my brain, but to be quite honest, this show is built around the core questions of my research and practice, to think about material culture and making processes. And yes, please come in further. It's closer. And so, actually all 3 of these artists, and one of the ones who is absent, have been absolutely foundational in my thinking. There's folks here who I have known for 20 years, right? When I was a student in Boston, knowing both Michael Rockowitz's work and Beth's work. And so this is just really such an honor to be sitting here with the 3 of you tonight. I will acknowledge that Michael Rockowitz and Jackie Law, 2 of the artists, were not able to be present, and send their regards. And without further ado, I'd like to name Jeff Huckleberry, Noel Garcia, and Ashley Freeby. And I'm going to turn it to each of you to just say what you will about yourself, and if you want to acknowledge something in the work, and if not, that's fine, and we'll just dive into some questions and conversation. Who are you?
So Jeff Huckleberry, from Boston. I've been doing performance for the last, I don't know, 25 years or so. What can I don't know what to say about. I've never really had a situation like this before, where there are photo documents of my work on the wall that represent the work, which is really, it startled me coming into the naked photographs at first, because even though I'm completely at ease with that scenario, I was like, here I am, you know, which is my performances, because in performance you're like, here I am, you know. So that's been interesting for me. I'm very grateful to have the work up. That's really great to see that stuff. You know, it's hard to look at that kind of thing, especially as an artist, because basically what you're doing is you're just looking at yourself all day long. So you're just trying to pick pictures of you. It's very narcissistic. It's not an easy thing to do, but I'm glad we got some good pictures out there. So that's good. That were, I think, representative of the way, you know, we worked kind of hard on it to try to figure out if there were photos that represented the work in a way that I felt like you could get a feeling for the way the performances operate. I think that's important with the photographs, because that's what I want to see when I look at a photograph of that kind of thing. I want to see what's going on and what it feels like a little bit from my perspective. You know, rolling around with the lumber and the beer and the broken bottles, like that's one particular experience that, you know, it's hard to communicate the feeling of that experience, but I think the photos do a pretty good job of kind of getting you in there if you're interested. So
we'll return to the lumber and the beer.
Yeah, all that
and
stuff.
the paint.
Yeah, sure. That's me.
Noel Garcia, Li'i Nunania. Nunu mo Pagwiduka a Sai. Hello, my name is Noel Garcia. I'm Klamath, Paiute, and Modoc. Those are tribes from out west in like Oregon, California, and Nevada area. Currently I live in Chicago. I'm a art professor and artist, and I don't know what else to say. What else? I really like dogs. Like when I was walking down here, there was like a fancy guy walking down the street, and he was walking a dog, and I was like staring at the dog. That I imagine like the way people Google each other when they think someone else is beautiful. Dog. So that's me. The backup to this conversation.
I'm gonna fill in for you, Noel. Some of Noel's work here. With the short. Okay. And doesn't feature dogs. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Ashley Freebie. I'm an artist and designer. I currently reside in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. Originally was in Chicago for grad school. I work for Oxbow School of Art and Artist Residency as their communications director. And this is kind of the first time that I've shown the two main bodies of my work that I've been working on since around 2019. So this series of Unsterile Soil that I've like blanketed a lot of projects under, and then also the Thoughts and Hem series, and this is kind of the first time they've been in an exhibition together, so I'm excited to kind of talk about those two projects in dialogue together.
Yeah, me too. Great. Yeah, I mean, that's a wonderful segue just to say that in pulling the show together, from each artist in the show, there's kind of different bodies of work that is maybe represented just more in the sense of the documentation from many different performances that's on the wall, as well as a live performance that will be presented as the closing program for the show on November 18th. Well, that's your painting work and beading work. And then as Ashley's already mentioned, the Plots and Hems series, which is more autobiographical, and the segment series, which is under the body of work called Unsterile Soil. So before we dive in really to some of the kind of content and framing, I'm wondering if you would humor me, each of you, in speaking. Oh, thank you. We're going to talk louder. Great. I'm wondering if you would humor me in speaking to some of the skills that you use. You don't have to start, Jeff. Just give me something next to me. What are some of the things that you do when you're making your work, and how do you relate to your ability to do that work or not, and those skills And if you choose, you can talk about where they kind of come from or not, but even to just name them. So, what are the things that you know how to do, or kind of know how to do in making your work? I mean, like physical hand.
Okay.
You can talk about conceptual skills too if you want. You all know how to make contemporary art, that's clear. That's covered.
For me, technically, if you see any of the sculptures, there's a few different types of bead weaving methods I use that are indigenous. But also one of the really exciting things about beads is like, because of colonization, which, you know, everyone's not super cool with colonization, but because of colonization, there's global trade. And because of global trade, so many different communities around the world have beads, and somehow a lot of them figured out to use them in the same way. And so one of my favorite ones is called the peyote stitch, which has religious relations to the Native American church. I think I'm saying that right, can I say, yeah. It kind of looks like a brick. And recently I had this realization, like, because I'm from Nevada and I live in Chicago now, like I used to really get excited about the idea of moving to Chicago, and I was really excited about bricks, all the textures, and I'm like, oh, the peyote stitch is bricks. It's just the pattern of bricks. So that's one of my favorite ones. You can kind of see it on the rifle over here. The cannon is made with a type of stitch called the tubular peyote. Initially, I wanted to make that piece completely that way. It can serve as a really good structure. As you see with the smaller revolver in the case, like that is completely, there's nothing supporting it inside. It is fully beads. But it didn't work with this because it was so heavy. So part of the gun is made using an applique stitch. So it's kind of like embroidery, only using beads. And these skills are things that I learned fairly young as a child. Like maybe around 6 or something, and I remember thinking it was really horrible, like how long it took and how tedious it was, but it was a means of making extra income for a lot of the female family members. So it's important to make sure your kids know it not only for cultural knowledge, but also to keep yourself sustained as a visual artist that actually relies on selling work. Oh, one more thing I want to add, because sorry, I'm a mess. So there's a type of stitch that's was originally from Plains Indians, right? And when they would stitch, it's kind of like a very long stitch, maybe like 2 inches wide, and there's a ton of beads on it, right? So when American troops first saw these women doing it, they said, oh, those women are so lazy, just sitting there like that, which I think is, you know, it's hilarious, because what else are you supposed to do when you're beading and sewing? So that technique is actually called the lazy stitch because of that. But there's a movement within contemporary indigenous communities to call it the paha stitch, or the mound stitch, which is what it's supposed to represent, like a mountain. So anyways, I just want to put that out there, because like the more you know about Native American art, the better I feel. So I imagine most of us have a very good education when it comes to European art, because our institutions are trained in that way. But we're often not very well educated on the art forms that are indigenous to where you're standing. So I'll stop rambling. I'm getting very excited about art history.
I would say quilt making is something that was always around me growing up. It's something that I think every female in my family has done in some way, shape, or form. If not quilt making, like garment making, so sewing, some sort of embroidery or things like that. That's been around me, and so it's become part of my practice to kind of learn those skills, to carry on those traditions that my family members have used throughout our histories. The other one I'll mention, because I think it relates to the work in the show, is gardening. I'm not gonna say that I'm a pro gardener or plant grower in any way, shape, or form, but it's another through line within my family history that relates to both sides of my family, so trying to learn those skills as well. Really fits into the work that I'm doing in my practice as well.
Skills. I often joke to people about when I'm getting my graduate degree, which was mostly about like putting a drop cloth over my head and getting naked and pouring something on myself. You
I
know?
have that same degree.
Yeah, I have that. I'm like, skills. You know, can you draw? A lot of my classes, you know. I think about, I guess I think about skills a lot. In fact, we were joking. I mean, I'm constantly joking about my carpentry skills. I'm like, I'm hoping that carpenter doesn't come to the show and look at my boxes, or, you know, because it's pretty ham-fisted. It's not, you know, it's hard and fast, and no matter how much I want to be a finished carpenter, I'll never be that. Anyway, it's not where this stuff goes. Most of the stuff that I make in performance ways is made to be kind of broken in some way. I mean, it is broken in as a metaphor in a lot of the work. But so it's not really ever, it's not precious in that certain way. So I'm never like using skills to like coax the beauty out of the object necessarily. You know, like I feel like, you know, if we're doing any coaxing of that kind, it's the whole thing, you know. It's not me or it or the skills that were used or the, you know, I mean, I feel like I was just sort of sitting here thinking about the art making process and about the skills necessary to, you know, to discover that for yourself and what those things are. And I'm, you know, for me, the skills, the biggest skill is constantly trying to figure out what doors to open, you know, and so far the doors that I have found and have opened have been pretty, like I feel like I've been pretty not successful in that sort of way, but that are that have worked, you know, that have worked so far. You know, I don't know if they're going to work forever, but they work so far. Like one of the doorways is getting naked. You know, that's a pretty easy door to walk through, and I learned that early on as a skill. Like that was the thing. And I've had students that, you know, the first thing they do is that, you know, and I was telling you earlier, the first thing they do is they're upside down in a bucket of pickles, you know, naked in a bucket of pickles. I'm like, okay, we're good. We've opened the door, you know, or, you know, suddenly they're, you know, they got a paper bag over their head and they're lighting it on fire. They're like, wait. You know, it's like, that's another door, you know, those are weird skills. You know, it's a weird skill, right? But it's a weird thing where you like, I've seen it happen, and it doesn't always happen with me, but you know, you do it in your studio, you see people that just like, they follow the trail, you know, wherever the trail goes, and they're really good at, they're instinctual about following the trail. I think that's a real skill, to like keep saying yes to yourself, even when you really shouldn't be saying yes. Because the trap is gonna close on your fingers, you know, so, also just being willing to expose yourself, I think is you know, I mean, we all have to figure out a way to do that in some way. You know, like, this woman, performance artist Sandra Johnson was talking to us one day and she's like, she was so tired from this performance festival circuits she was doing. And she's like, yeah, it's like all I do is I stick a knife in, I open up my guts, I pull my guts out, I poke them out of the ground, I look at them, I show them to you, and then I just pile them all back in and sew it up, and then I go to the next thing, you know. I'm like, yeah, that's really exhausting. You know, that's the skill.
Metaphorically.
Yeah, no, not literally.
Ready to go there with you?
Yeah, not literally doing that, but that's what it felt like. She's a very quiet artist. Like she thinks she'll trace the line of this, you know, she'll trace the line with her toe, you know, for 3 hours to that point. You know, but for her, that's, you know, here everything about me is out, you know, for you. So those are the skills that I think of when I think of, you know, art making. So
That was a beautiful segue. Thank you, Walter. Because one of my next questions is, and you might be able to say pass, because you kind of answered it already. if you can speak to how much of yourself is in the work and how you navigate. You don't have to tell us, right? Like, but let me put it this way. There is so much of each of you in this work. There's a lot that's personal, or exposed, whether it's the actual guts or not. And that's a lot of what I really respect in the work. And in the context of this show, I am deliberately drawing everyone's attention to some of the aspects of your cultural backgrounds, right? Which is a dangerous proposition in terms of kind of closing off the interpretation of work as you. It's about you, right? Because it's not all about you. And I wonder if you could just speak to kind of figure out exactly how to pose that question. So what, how do you know it's that right line of how much to share and where to kind of draw a boundary in the work?
I don't know if I have a specific answer. I think it's something that I'm still like feeling out when I'm making, especially when I'm making work that's autobiographical, sorry, about my family. And so, there has been times where I've made something and I've been like, yeah, I'm gonna put this in the gallery, it's gonna be great. And then I get to the gallery space and I'm like, oh, I can't. So I think it has come to the point where it's like a gut feeling. And I've learned to kind of allow myself to also know that it is okay to kind of retract when it doesn't feel right. Because it is so personal. And it's so, I mean, I'm putting like direct quotes from my family members. In this show, there's a quilt that's made by my grandmother. So there's work, from her directly in here. So I would say it's a balance that I am just like trying to figure out. The other thing that I'll mention, so with the unsterile soil work, that's been research that I've been doing since 2015. And it's all surrounded around the unjustly shootings of Black victims by police officers. And I think one of the things, that is definitely something that's related to me as a Black individual. But something that I don't think necessarily often comes through as the work is the emotional labor that comes with doing that research for as long as I have been. And I think that's another emotional and physical labor, because there is a physical aspect to that work as well. And that's another thing where I have to really just like, I think I internalize it just to get the work done, because I think it is important to talk about, and it is important for my voice as an artist. So I think for that, it's a different feel. It's like, oh, I have to kind of like put on this facade and get this work done. Whereas with my family related work, it's really just about like feeling if that's the right place, the right curator to work with. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and because I know some folks were just joining us as we got started and probably haven't had a chance to look around the show. I'd like to just share a description of the segment series, or you're welcome to.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can, yeah. So around the corner here, we have 5 of the segment series, 4 as photographs and 1 as a temporary monument, the sculpture itself. In the segment series, each piece cast out of dirt, sand, gravel, grass seed, and sometimes other mulch and natural layers, is dedicated to a Black American killed by police. So the physical segment that we have here, I don't have the number in my head, but it's to there's a 10-year-old who we lost in March of this year in Dinwiddie County, Virginia, I believe at the age of 28. I think so. We can calculate. But too young, whether it's 25 or 28. So as some context, that's how some of Ashley's work manifests in this archiving and research that you've been doing around the violence on Black Americans. And there is an amazing connection in showing this work with Plots and Hems, the more autobiographical quilt and gardening series, in seeing that skill that you take on to learn and kind of explore how one might plot a garden in Plots and Hems, and then to be working the earth, right, to make these temporary monuments in the segment series. I don't know if you want to add to that, but I don't think so. Maybe it's a little bit, but a little bit marinate. Yeah, there's also a poem, Earth Murmur #1, that Ashley wrote that's available as a takeaway. So I'll draw your attention to that when the program closes. Make sure you check out that
I think when I was a younger artist, I would divulge a lot more information, because it's difficult to separate myself as an Indigenous person and a person of color from being an artist. And I used to express a lot more information, and I think if you guys remember a few years ago, there was that Dana Schutz painting of Emma Till. And I'm sure you guys have heard the phrase cultural capital, but like, you know, some people inherit property and wealth, and some people inherit stories and their culture, right? And so I started asking myself those questions, like, how much am I capable? How much is ethical to share? What do I feel comfortable with? And so every work I make involves a lot of that reflection. And sometimes there are other things that, like, I had a family member who had committed suicide, and I was affected by it, and I wanted to make some art, but then I had a dream that he told me that he didn't want me to draw him a poem. And so I'm like, well, I don't know if that's just some part of my psyche, or if that's someone telling me they don't agree or they don't consent to being in my artwork, and I take it seriously. So the thing is, I divulge, I try to make sure there's multiple entry points, or I think of it like there's I think it's Lakota tribe, they make dolls that don't have a face, and it's intentional so that when the children play with the doll, they can imagine a different face on it, right? And I think it's like a clever thing that Glenn Leakin does too, where you see something that says, I am a man, you say, who is I, right? What is the pronoun I referring to? Is it referring to the artist, the viewer, the original author, right? So I do like to leave an openness to a lot of artworks, some ambiguity, so you can interact with it. And every artwork does have very personal meanings and stories, but it's not absolutely necessary that everyone knows exactly what that story is. Because trust needs to be earned, and work needs to be done on someone else's part, not necessarily mine. And that's, I guess, how I kind of approach it.
Is it all right if I comment on this idea of ambiguity?
Yes.
Because I think that one of the things that I love about the work Manning Brass, which some of you can see, it's in this corner right here. It consists of 4 elements: a painting on unstretched canvas, literally of a man face down in the grass, or a person in jeans. It says man in grass, so we're gonna make a man. Then there is a green fringe on the ground and a moccasin. On the wall, there is a piece of leather with the pattern pieces for making a moccasin. And then there is a sketch of the same image, of which there's a painting of the man in the grass. And part of the key ambiguity in that work is what's happening in this image? What is the relationship between this body and the earth? And there's a sense that he may be sinking, dead, asleep. Maybe he's rising out of the ground. You definitely feel the gravity in the figure. But it's also, you know, like there's something tense about it, but it's also soft. Emphasized also by the fringe on the ground. The grass is really lush. The color is vibrant. It would be a wonderful place for a nap. Right? It looks like it could be a great nap. And so that ambiguity of what is happening with the figure, as well as what that relationship is, that passing or sinking or floating, is literally in this work, and I think speaks to some of that. In the same way, like, I know that there's a story of that image of what was actually happening that you witnessed, and that's not necessarily something we need to know. You can decide, but right, and instead, like, there's something beautiful in trying to just read the image for those multiple stories of what may be happening with that figure, as well as who that figure may be.
But the key to the secrets is in the little QR code, which is totally a last minute decision of murder. But if you look at that, all the secrets of my artwork will be unveiled.
That was a good sell.
All pictures. Oh, yeah. QR code.
Do you wanna talk about lumber?
I mean, I guess I was just sort of thinking. So thinking through your answers and trying to think of what my answer would be, and I don't really have a great one. I mean, I guess.
Then don't answer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
Are there other things in your
No,
practice?
I guess that it's fairly, I mean, I think there's a lot of obvious layers to the things that are happening. I mean, there's just me, it's a fact of me. You know, and then there's the sort of fact of my family history with other me's. You know, a lot of other me's in that family, and their relationships to the objects that I usually bring into my performance, and my relationship to them through the objects that I usually bring. That I most often bring. And of course, there's the beer and lumber, which are the two main factors there, you know, and those played in various forms. A lot of those wreaked havoc throughout my, you know, family history. But we're also touchstones to connect with them in another way. So they're not symbolic, you know, they're real, they're active connectors to that family. For better or worse. And, you know, there's sometimes I really wish I didn't have to connect with them, but again, these are doors for which the work can kind of get done. I feel like there's no way to do work without fully exposing, like it's really important to me, and for some reason, to expose and completely embarrass myself in front of people. I'm often caught with my pants down, like figuratively and literally. So many, yeah, in so many ways. And I just at a certain point I'm like, well, this is just the thing that has to happen. Like they're just layers. You have to peel off these layers, and one of the ways you peel off the thing is you get naked for people. The other way is you have to embarrass yourself in some way. You have to be exposed, not like I'm exposing myself, but I have to be exposed by the work. Because maybe I can't do it by myself. So the work, I always think the performances I'm not in charge of that situation. Like I'm just a participant in this thing that's going on. And I kind of step into it and be like, oh, hey, what's happening? I'm like, okay, now your pants are down, you know, it's like, whoa, you know, how did I'm like, how did we get here? And I say, oh, we're here. And then we keep going. And so that doesn't really talk a lot about um, the who I am in the piece. It's funny because I don't, you know, because most of this stuff is process oriented, even though I do have some things like that I would kind of like to see happen. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, when I'm going into a situation like that. And I certainly bring objects that I think may or may not facilitate those things, or that I'm kind of into, like dogs, you know, like I could see that becoming a thing. I don't know. I doubt with dogs. It's called oh, no, the dog thing completely ruined my train
I'm
of
so
thought.
sorry.
That's right.
You have some ideas of what you might be trying to do. Maybe, would you be open to describing the rainbow series or some of the rainbows?
Yeah.
And the
Well,
things
like,
that
so
you
that,
might try to do that may or may not happen.
yeah. I guess so. I was doing a lot of work that was basically just black and white. I was really into this thing of like these two specific colors interacting, you know, hoping to find some grayness, you know, something in between those two things. Like, what's the thing in between? And I often try to figure out a way to like skirt the dichotomy and just like go down the middle of something and try to, you know, play in that space, in the middle space. So I thought I had this performance that I was doing in Marseille and I didn't quite know what to do. And I'm like, okay, well, let's just do all the colors. What's all the colors? What's all the colors? I'm just so sick of this stupid black and white thing. And so then, oh, a rainbow, that's a good idea. And so then my next idea was like, oh, I'll just be a rainbow. Or can I be a rainbow? And so, so I set up this situation in Marseille where I had this piece of plywood out in the middle of this parking lot. And I had the rainbow colors in tempera paint and these big bottles of tempera paint. And so what I would do is I would just I would pour a bottle of tempera paint in my mouth and try to hold that color in my mouth. And then throw myself backwards onto the plywood, and in the thinking that what I was doing was making this cool arc with my body before it hit the ground. And then I would get back up and I would pour another color into my mouth and I would hold that thing and I would, sorry, I'm totally gonna. Okay, and I would throw myself back and and so I did that 7 times to get all the colors to be the rainbow. And of course, it doesn't look like a rainbow. It's so dumb. It's like, don't look like a rainbow. There's like literally nothing rainbow-esque about this. Like, it's like, I don't know. Anyway, so that's where. And then of course, I'm totally concussing myself on the ground, like literally, I think, oh, this is gonna be, I can do this. I'll just throw myself like through the air, land on my back. And I'm just, every time I get up, I'm like, what? You know, and then I'm just so dumb. I don't even like to tell my wife that story because she wasn't there. She's like. Why? So that's where it started. And then I started, of course, thinking about rainbows, and I had to start making more rainbows after that. And it became a thing where like there was this possibility, which was that I do a lot of work to make this rainbow happen. You know, actuate or whatever you want to call it, paint it, talk to it, sing to it, do all of this work, this heavy lifting, you know, sweating, dancing, whatever I can do. To get these colors up into the air. And the idea was always has been to like be able to paint this wood into a rainbow and then throw it up into the air and have it like become a rainbow. Sorry, keep my body movements smaller. And of course, I think you know, depending on the size of the wood, it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Most of the time it doesn't. Of course, there's that triptych in there. That's like the heaviest possible thing that was given to me to lift, you know. And so it was basically all I could do to get it onto my shoulder for like 3 seconds, you know, and then it's like off, you know. I love the metaphor. I loved the metaphor for a really long time, and for me, there's a number of things. There's a sort of bridge to the spirit world. There's this historical, there's the sort of Greek mythology that was it that rides the rainbow and his chariot that can Apollo or something like that. So there's this bridge that's happening. And, you know, and I love the idea that this is a bridge to this place that makes me pull my, you know, that embarrasses, that this sort of interesting place you put your foot into, and you get carried along on this process of art making. So I think it's one of those doors, it's a bridge. I also love the metaphor of it being impossible, and that this sort of, you know, this sort of search for this, you know, the rainbow and the pot of gold, and this, you know, like, I think of it as an artist, you know, this is like the dream of this ridiculous, you know, that I'm searching for this, you know, this beautiful, you know, this impossibility to, you know, to come to fruition, and it never will, you know, but it does, you know, it's weird, it's like it does, but it doesn't, and it never will, and it will, all the time, contains.
Heard of the phrase rainbow bridge in relation to animals? Like when they die, they cross over the rainbow bridge?
Yeah, it's a very,
So that's like where
yeah.
all the happy dogs are.
right, it's really. That makes so much sense, man.
Yeah. You look like you were near tears and we're talking about.
I didn't even know, yeah, and so it's like this, so often I don't know what the forms is about, now I do. Now I do.
Would either of you like to speak to the way that your work bridges the spirit world? You can decline, but I know it's there.
Ooh, that's a loaded question.
Let me put it, I can reframe.
Yeah, what do you want me to say? What's it?
Alright. I guess we'll do the emotional labor here first, and then I look forward to hearing you. Either of you chime in. You just gave me all the segues tonight, Doc, and I'm appreciative of that. So in thinking of the rainbow as, a bridge to the spirit world, that feels really relevant to so much of the work in the show. Janelle used the word, legacy, but in thinking about, ancestral knowledge and those who came before us, and how are they still with us, and how do we carry something forward from that. These are all of these metaphors, right? We're back to carrying in the boat, and the work of that and the absurdity of that. But there are ways in which that is really present in individual work, as well as in the process and embodiment of the way each of you make your work. And so I might just open a open-ended question. You've already acknowledged that an object that your grandmother made is in the room. I've acknowledged that there's an image of your father in the room. But are there spirits here or that you have worked with, or is there that you wanna make sure this audience is aware of when they get a moment after this conversation to re-encounter the work? Is that a better question?
Yeah, I mean, my whole family's basically back there. Unfortunately, I would say a lot of my family passed away when I was really young. I lost my dad when I was 25. And so even though there's not work specifically about him, there are those skills that I've been carrying on from him. He was the main influence behind, learning this gardening skill. He had always had a beautiful garden. And so, working with soil, working on the plots and hems quilts, which are actual garden plots, one being one of his gardens. My grandma's work is back there. But I think in that work specifically, there's a lot of family members that, come through in the techniques and also kind of the work itself. And then I would say I'm working with spirits that I don't know or have no specific relationship with. The segment series, each one of those segments is dedicated to someone who I have no connection with. And so that's and that segment series is, I think of those little earth bricks as, a faster, that's a weird word to say, but they go through a life cycle, as we do as well. And so, or any living thing does. They're built, there's a care in taking care of them. To grow. There's a decay, no matter how much you like continue to water, take care of them, they eventually just like break down. Any sort of vibration or movement in the gallery starts to really break them down over time too, they start to dry out, and so eventually they also die. So I think there's, you know, those spirits, I feel connected to in the work, even though, you know, because I am reading about who they were, prior to making the segment. And so I think there is sort of this attachment, however, you know, that works within my practice, but, yeah, I'll leave it there.
I really love ancient Chinese landscape painting, and one of my favorite authors is a guy named Song Ping, and he was an artist, and he used to climb a mountain very frequently, just for fun. And when he became older, he could no longer climb the mountain, so instead he painted it. And through the process of painting, he experienced the mountain, right? And it's very normal philosophies you see in Asian art, and they cross over there. It's a lot in Native American art. So, and I've always kind of thought of the act of drawing as an act of expressing affection, because my father sent me letters and there were always drawings. So the act of painting a person or an experience or a memory is an act of having it about again. And I don't know if anyone's like Star Trek Deep Space Nine fans, but like in the first few episodes, the captain meets these aliens. And they're having a hard time understanding linear time. And he's explaining that he's keeping his wife alive through memory. And it's kind of that too. So like I'm keeping people alive to the experience of, or keeping relationships alive to the experience of painting them and drawing them and making even artifacts about them. But then also like, you know, there's things you see in indigenous tribes where like if you wear like the wolf pelt, you embody that wolf for a while too. So there's a lot of that happening. I think another thing that happens too is like, because my father was put into Indian boarding school shortly after the US government terminated our tribe, which means like we didn't exist as Native American people between like the 1950s and like when I was born in like the 80s. And all these children, this generation before me, were intentionally removed from their homes and lost the language and things like that. And so the act of researching my own culture is this act of like stitching together a wound for like ancestors that I don't even know, for my father himself. So in the act of making art, I fulfill or heal his severe trauma, spiritual trauma. But then also like I'm noticing as I get older too, just being an authority, like a faculty member or something, and being an Indigenous woman and just like sharing these stories, it reaches other Indigenous people in the arts too, and they feel more emboldened and they get more powerful. So like I'm entering like baby elder status. Or I can like start like giving some like spiritual advice to like young art indigenous kids. So like, yeah. Anyhow, that's my answer.
Beautiful. Thank you all for speaking to your work, each of you for sharing your work with us. I think we have a little. So if anyone has a question that they want to pose to the group or to an individual up here, feel free, and we will of course also break and I'll be around for conversation in the remainder of the evening. Do you have a question?
Yes, but Jeff, do you have to work out physically so you're able to do this performance where you're lifting these heavy objects?
Yes.
You can find your gym membership on your passes.
But yeah, I hurt my back and I play high school football, so I always wear a back brace, so it's always here, just when I do lift those things, because it goes out really easily if I'm not careful, and the back brace helps me remember to not be stupid. But then I go do the stupid thing anyway. So, yeah, and yes, yeah, it's important to stay healthy and do that stuff, So, and I was just worrying about that actually. Today, I was worrying about that for performances coming up, like, oh, God, I'm really, so.
I once at Mobius, one of the many, many Mobius spaces, performance group space in Boston, I think stumbled into the back closet. I was trying to get something to help Marilyn or somebody else. And we were there on an exercise bike, like on a stationary bike, like, because like an hour later you were gonna perform.
Right.
And it was this like secret that like,
Yeah, you have to kind of prepare the way.
like for an hour before performing live, you were just going up all the mountains.
Yeah, you have to kind of warm up for those events, they're pretty, it's kind of intense. So there's a lot of work and, it's a lot of work, right, like, for a short amount of time, so kind of have to fit it all in. And it's, I mean, I don't really notice it when it's happening, but I notice it afterwards. So
So how do you get booked for performances?
how do I get booked?
Yeah.
Well, you say, hey, come to.
I mean, is it basically word of mouth, and do you have to have an agent or?
No, it's mostly word of mouth. You can apply for things, but it's mostly word of mouth. It depends. There's some circuits and some festivals and some places where it's you can, but friendship networks really help. Exchanges are great, so people come from Norway and then they see your work and you see theirs and then they invite you to come to their thing. So that's kind of how it works. Nobody makes any money, but we, but we make a lot of art, so. Yeah.
So how do you make a living by your amazing by teaching?
No, I work as a bicycle mechanic,
Oh,
so we have a lot of side hustles,
To fund our dangerous
Yeah,
art
to fund-
addictions.
yeah. A lot of side hustles.
Other questions?
I have a question. I think your name is Ashley.
Yes.
I have a question about something that you shared a few minutes ago. I think I have a question, and what might happen is some words will come out that don't make a lot of sense, and we can both acknowledge that.
All right.
You mentioned the artifacts that some artifacts of your practice, when you bring them into an exhibition space, suddenly they feel maybe like not for an audience. And I'm wondering if that is because something about your own relationship to them changes when you're in the space, or if like, do the objects get reclassified as like part of the process and not part of exhibition? Or I was just curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's probably more so like what it feels like in space. Cause I think when it's in your studio or, I mean, I have a home studio, so it's in my home. And so I think there's this relationship that I create with objects that's based upon my studio space or even just like my home space. And so then when it comes in the gallery, I think that that shifts and maybe it's because of the like commercial aspect of the gallery. I think also it's probably, I mean, I really liked what you said about your dream that you had, about your skeleton. But I think maybe it's also like the work speaking back to me. And I, want to listen because a lot of those objects are, there is a family history there. And so listening to what parents have to say, when they enter the space is, I think, necessary when it comes to those objects. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Sitting, there's clearly a dialogue between the men here and the face down photo at the bottom over there. And that just sort of inspired me to ask all three of you if you wanted to, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what's happening between the different your different works of art, and how you feel you're interpreting the work of your colleagues, because it seems that we learned a lot about your own process, but looking around the kind of way in which even positioned in the space, I'm really struck by what's happening across, and I feel like I don't have really the language to express or talk or understand about that. So I'd love to hear from the three of you sort of about how you're thinking about who's talking to who and in what way.
I think what you might be, what I'm hearing you saying is like kind of noticing after the curation, when like Hannah is, there's so many very smart moments like that you might miss, where you can see like a repetition of, the figure or something, or even like how the figure even like is repeated in the way your body of the people that were shot. There's like so many little moments, or like even with our works together, that little event, like the colors and like the femininity. And I do I think about sewing and needles in that room and that lavender. So I think it's, is that kind of like what you're thinking about? Yeah.
But I'd love to hear what you guys think about each other's sort of.
So I'm gonna say, if you wanna say something, feel free, but to their defense, right, the show finished installing today. So we can expect them to speak to each of their own work, because they knew that before today, and maybe after a drink. The words will come a little more freely to reflect on each other's work. I really hope that you all will spend some time to find those connections yourself. A lot of that seeks to be is intentional and is as a way of opening up the works broader than what first drew me to them to share them, or the way that each of you speak about them, but that by holding them here together, there can be deeper and broader conversations. And so, yeah, there's everything from color to, and the thing I go back to immediately is, I was starting months ago now trying to write about the show. What is this? Right? We're writing grants over a year ago. Okay, how do we call this show? I know it works in the show, but what is it? And I just have this notebook that I went back to recently, and it's like, there's a lot of death in this show, right? But it's also a lot of life in this show, a lot of vibrancy, a lot of hand. There's a real reverence for physical material and its import, at the same time that it's also Your grandmother's quilt is on the floor of the gallery.
I know. Yeah, an argument about that.
So there's, I think that tie all five of the artists together, is that wrestling, right? And that listening to the spirit, and that there are some overlaps in the ways of working and humor that we've heard exhibited by both Noelle and Jeff tonight, right? I think really brings their work in amazing conversation together.
Do like the way they're talking together, like dark, so dark, but then it's also like fun and like masculine and like playful with the way you have the colors and it's like a nice little man moment. Young man moment. Yeah.
And then we have sarcophagus.
Yeah.
And you're eating a meal off the plate of a ghost, a title, right, of one of Michael Rockwood's food-based work, so lots of connections to find. I will also say that in upcoming programming, of which we have a lot coming up, there's gonna be more opportunity for these conversations, including a slow looking event. I know that in just 2 weeks on September, I'm looking for Lydia, September 21st.
Yes.
Waitson Jones, a DC-based abstract painter, will be doing a creative response, getting his lens for experiencing the work here. We also have an amazing insight speaker coming up. We will be hosting a Dar al Sol dinner with Michael Rockwood. Will be in town later in October. Slow looking event, Chef Rice Connect event, so much. Stay tuned. Make sure you're on our mailing list, and of course, Jeff's performance as the closing program on November 18th. What am I missing now?
Don't forget to grab an exhibition catalog before you go. It's been obviously it's been an incredible journey to watch Hannah create this show. It was dreamed about before he joined us almost 2 years ago from the School of Art in Chicago, and it's been beautiful to watch this come to life. It's so wonderful to hear from these artists that we learned about almost 2 years ago. And Hannah's essay in that catalog is really incredible and touches on a lot of the gems that you're going to notice yourself and some that you won't notice yourself as you're exploring the show. So please do grab the catalog before you go. And thank you all.